Hello, everyone. Welcome to your Bible questions answered. So glad that you are here. I'm looking forward to taking your questions as always. Hey, by way of reminder, you need to know that we are going to Israel in April 2024. You can still go, there's still some room. It is filling up, but there's still some room. So go to thewaycongregation.com and you can click on the button that says Israel. If you want to support this ministry, you can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp and give any amount of your choice. And let's see. Oh, there's great stuff on the app. And that is also where you can put in your questions if you want to get first in line for the questions. So you can go to the Way Congregation app and, well, you can go to your Play Store or on Apple or Google and get that there. So, all right, let's get into the questions. There's some good ones today. As always, one person was asking if I have written my screenplay for the book, and so far the answer is kind of. All right, so the book actually it's gone through a lot of iterations, but partly it was sort of written as a screenplay, and then COVID hit, and then we turned it into a book, and it'll take just a little bit to turn it back into a screenplay. But yeah, check out the book, and if you want to help with the screenplay, I guess that'd be okay. So just let me know. All right. This is a great question from Diana. She says, is the image of jealousy in Ezekiel 8:1-10 the same as Daniel's abomination of desolation, whether in the sense of prophetic vision or historical typology? All right, so let's take a look there at Ezekiel 8:1-10, and we will get a better sense of what is actually happening there in the text. So Ezekiel 8, right. All right, so and it came to pass in the 6th year, et cetera, I looked, and there was a likeness like the appearance of fire. He stretched out his hand. All right, and he says, takes it to the door of the north gate of the inner court, where the seat of the image of jealousy was, which provokes to jealousy. And behold, the glory of the Lord of Israel was there, like the vision that I saw in the plain. All right, so Son of Man, do you see what they're doing here? The great abominations that the house of Israel commits here to make me go far away from my sanctuary. And I turn again, you'll see greater abominations. Okay, so it seems to be that the image of jealousy was at the entrance. Now, whether that's on the inside of the entrance or the outside of the entrance, I think is a little bit challenging to deduce. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind is this image of jealousy is probably some kind of a sexual reference. I think it has something to do with Asherah. Not entirely clear. I've heard suggestions that it's some kind of genitalia. So that's about as far as I can go. But that's all I know. I really can't say more about it because I just don't think that we have, at least not that I'm aware of, but I don't think we have any other definitions there. All right. Jonathan asks, may I use your definition of time uh, is the measurement of change in a book I'm writing? You certainly can. Yeah. Thanks for asking, but you're certainly welcome to do that. All right, this is from Maria. Where do you think the marriage supper of the Lamb will be at the start of the millennium? Yeah, so Maria, I really think that the marriage supper of the Lamb, to really understand this, to answer your question fully, we've got to go back and understand certain things about what is actually going on in relationship to who are we talking about, right? Who is the Lamb? Well, the Lamb is Jesus, obviously, but who is the bride? Okay, so now I was raised in the church, and so I always heard that the church is the bride. And it's partly correct, but it's not really entirely correct. Let's take a look at Hosea chapter 1 and then chapter 2 to get a better sense of what's going on. All right, so the Lord is speaking to Hosea here, and he says, I will no longer have mercy in the house of Israel, but I will have mercy in the house of Judah. Right? So he's speaking to the northern kingdom of Israel. Call her name or his name Lo Ami, for you're not my people. I'll not be your God. Right? Then you have Lo Ruchama, no mercy. Right? So we have all that. And then we have in chapter 2, go talk to your sisters, say to your brethren, my people, and your sisters, mercy is shown. Bring charges against your mother, bring charges, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. So God was married, then he's not married. Okay. So we see here that he's like, okay, that's it. I'm not married anymore. Now let's cruise over to Jeremiah chapter 3. They say if a man divorces his wife and she goes from him, it becomes another man's, may he return to her again. Would not that land be greatly polluted? But you've played the harlot with many lovers, yet return to me. All right, so he's talking to, at this point, he's talking to the southern kingdom of Judah, but then he makes reference to the northern kingdom of Israel. Have you seen what backsliding Israel, the northern kingdom, has done? She's gone up on every high mountain under every green tree, and there played the harlot. And I said, after she had done all these things, come back to me, return to me, Shuvilai. But she did not return, and her treacherous sister Judah saw it. Then I saw that for all the causes for which backsliding Israel, the northern kingdom, had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. All right. And then Judah went and did the same, but he never divorced the southern kingdom of Judah because he made a promise to David. All right. So in Hosea, he says, you're not my wife anymore. But then he says, this is super critical. He says, I will betroth you to me forever. I'll betroth you to me in righteousness and justice and loving kindness and mercy. I'll betroth you to me in faithfulness and you shall know the Lord. So he's saying that he's going to marry the northern kingdom of Israel. In fact, both Israel and Judah, he's going to put them back together. Right. It'll be in those days that it was said, right. So let's go back to chapter 1. It says, yet the number of the children of Israel should be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered. It's going to pass in the place where it said to them, you are not my people. There should be said to them, you are sons of the living God. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. Oh man, that's really, really good stuff. All right. Now, both Peter and Paul quote this in the book of Romans and in First Peter. Okay. So they are both quoting from this very passage, speaking of the northern kingdom of Israel. All right. So let's go back. The question again was when or where, kind of both of those mixed together, will be the marriage supper of the Lamb. Well, partly depends who is the bride. And again, I was saying I grew up with the understanding with this teaching that the church was the bride. And I'm saying that's partly correct, but it's not completely correct. Because what I was told was that the church had essentially kind of replaced or superseded Israel, at least for a time. That's what my dispensational teachers taught me. They didn't think that the church had actually replaced Israel, but that for the time being, we were the thing that God was about. And then he was going to go back and do something with the Jews. But I think that's missing the point entirely. I think the program has always been about Israel. God then divorced the northern kingdom of Israel. Where did he send them? Into the Gentiles, right, into the nations. And then he called them back. He said, look, I'm going to betroth you to me, right? So for God to betroth someone who were not his people, who became part of the Gentiles, what does he have to do? He has to betroth himself to the Gentiles, who become part of the what? The commonwealth of Israel. And this is where it gets really cool. All right. So then we have to go to Ephesians chapter 2. Now, I know some of you guys have heard me talk about this before, and I don't think it's time wasted if we talk about it again. Why? Because it took me a long time to really understand it. All right. So Paul is talking to a group of people, and let me just make this very clear. Therefore, remember that you once Gentiles, okay, Gentiles, where did the northern kingdom of Israel go? Into the Gentiles. What were they? Not a people. They were not God's people. They just became part of the riffraff. They became one of the Gentiles, one of the nations, and they were not his people. And now they've been called to become part of his people. And so Paul tells us that you, once Gentiles, at that time without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. So you Gentiles who were far off, who are not a people, have been brought into this thing called the commonwealth of Israel. So the commonwealth of Israel is the bride. All right. That is the bride. Does that include so-called Christians? Well, yes. But understand that these Christians, which I would call myself a Christian, but as a Christian, I'm now part of the commonwealth of Israel. All right. So that is where I am. And so that's what we have to understand, is that we've been brought into the commonwealth of Israel. And so once we understand that, once we understand who is the bride, then we can better make sense of the question again, where or when will be and will be. Uh, yeah, well, anyway, when and where will be the marriage supper of the Lamb? Well, who is it for? It is for the commonwealth of Israel. That is the bride. So Jesus comes back. He's going to obviously kick a lot of butt when he comes back. He puts Satan away. And then all who have been part of this, who've been waiting for this, who've been waiting for the hope of the resurrection, are going to participate in this wonderful time that we know as the millennium. And whoever has a new body, we know that the resurrection is going to happen at the return of Jesus. We see that in Ezekiel chapter 37. Of course, we see that in many places in the New Testament. First Thessalonians chapter 4 is one of those major passages, and many others. That's going to happen at the beginning of the millennium. Obviously, Revelation chapter 20 as well. So I would suggest that would include Adam and Eve, that would include King David, that would include Moses, that would include all the patriarchs, all the people that have been waiting for this wonderful moment. I've heard some people say, oh, no, it's only going to be people who are alive at the end or part of the church age. And again, I think that misses the boat entirely. It becomes very exclusive. It's very church centric. And I think that is a grave mistake. So it's all who have ever put their hope in God and the Messiah, in whatever form they understood the Messiah, all those centuries and millennia ago. But again, they've been waiting for the word of the Lord to come and to make possible a restoration of heaven and earth, right? So that's what they've been waiting for. And finally, the Messiah is going to do that. So I submit to you that the marriage supper of the Lamb will take place at the beginning of the millennium. It's going to take place on earth, okay, not far away, but actually on the earth. So let's see here. Let me just let's see. I think it's Matthew 18, where Jesus talks about those who will come. And here we go. Matthew 8. My bad. Okay. So Matthew 8. Let me pull this up for you guys. There we go. All right. So Jesus talks about this time. He said, assuredly I say to you, I've not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. There'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said to the Syrian, go your way. And as you have believed, so let it be done to you. All right. So this is the whole story of the centurion who just said, Lord, you don't need to come to my house. Just say the word and it's good. Right. So he's like, wow, that's pretty cool. And he's saying, look, in the kingdom of heaven, that is the kingdom or the age to come, doesn't have to be up in the sky. That's not the point. Kingdom of heaven is a circumlocution for kingdom of God. You can see how that's used in the book of Luke, and he uses that to speak of the same exact thing. So, kingdom of heaven is another way of saying the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is going to happen here, and they're going to come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. All right, so that gives you a sense that this is going to happen on the earth, right? It's going to be a restored earth. It's going to be a renewed earth. It's going to be an earth that's put back the way it is supposed to be in that time frame. So again, happens at the beginning of the millennium. I think the heavens and the earth are restored to their state of innocence, perfection. Their Gan Eden state at the beginning, not at the end. I have done a number of videos on that. If you want to check that out, I think the first one's called Millennium Heaven on Earth. Well, I did that. That was over a decade ago. Time flies. Yeah, so I did that a while ago, and you guys are welcome to check that out. It's right here on my YouTube channel, so do check it out. All right, let's go to our next question. Can you explain what you mean by the gathering you've mentioned a few times? Do you mean gathered together when he is back to rule with him and not before this time? Do you believe that we are the ones coming back with Jesus in Revelation 19? Well, yeah. Here's what I know. We know from Isaiah 26, it says that, come, my people, enter into your chambers until the indignation is past. All right. So exactly when does he pick us up? It's going to be after the time of the tribulation. And then he's going to come out of his place. It says, for the Lord comes out of his place to judge the inhabitants of the earth. So that means he's coming, he's fighting. Now, those armies that are in heaven, let's take a look there in Revelation chapter 19 so we can get a better sense of what's going on. All right. Okay. So I heard a great multitude is coming. I'm going to feel at his feet. And I saw the heavens open, and behold, a white horse, and him who was sat on it was called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, etc. He was clothed, and the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Now, the armies in heaven, I know it's often been interpreted that that is talking about Christians, okay, for lack of a better word. And I don't think that that's impossible, but I don't think that is the main emphasis of the text. Let's go back for a second. What is a major epithet of God? He's called the Lord of hosts. All right. So in Hebrew, that's the word tzvaot or tseva. Tseva is the word for army. Tzvaot are armies. So he's the Lord of hosts, or Jehovah Tsevaot, right? That's how it's rendered in the English. So Jehovah Tsevaot or Yehovah Tzvaot is the Lord of armies. Okay, so there we have already a sense of the armies. Who are those armies talking about throughout the Bible? It's talking about the angelic hosts. Those are the hosts that we're talking about. We see this in 2 Kings chapter 6, where Elisha and his servant are surrounded by the Syrians, and Elisha prays that the young man's eyes would be open. And he looks around and he sees that there is an army, a celestial army, an angelic army of horses and chariots of fire. Right. So there you have it. Of course, we know about Michael, Gabriel, and those various references to that. So I think we can make a very good case that we're talking about not so much Christians, as it were, not so much humans, but really we're talking more about the angelic host. Let's take a look here at Jude, chapter 1. Of course, there's only one chapter, and then we will come to what verse is it? Okay, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints. Now again, If we look here at the cross reference, this is Deuteronomy 33. The Lord came from Sinai, dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came with 10,000s of saints. From his right hand came a fiery law for them. Now, was he coming with his Christians? Well, unlikely. What does he mean by saints? These are the holy ones. Holy ones is often a reference to angels. All right. So it doesn't have to just be humans, right? We see in scripture that it talks about his holy angels, his kedushim. So it's talking about angels here, and it's not talking about humans. All right. The Lord came to Mount Sinai. He didn't come with a bunch of humans up in his retinue, but he came with a bunch of angels in his retinue. Right. And that really seems to be the same imagery that we have, right? We know, in fact, we know in the Gospels that Jesus is going to come back with who? With his angels, right? Let's take a look at Matthew chapter 24, because there Jesus talks about it, right? So Matthew 24, we'll go down just a little bit here. And immediately after the tribulation of those days, the Son of Man will appear in heaven. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. Well, there you go, right? He's coming with his angels. Of course, First Thessalonians. The Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, right? He's coming with his angels. Let's take a look at Matthew 25, because there it talks about the same thing. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all his holy, there's the word saints, holy angels with him. So this can confuse things because we have two different words in English, the word saint, the word holy. They are exactly the same thing. In Greek, they are the word hagios. They mean exactly 100% the same thing. But when we use the word holy to use it as we use it different ways. Okay, but we could say holy ones, or we could say saints. So the word saints is essentially the nominative. It's the subject. But if we want to say holy, it can't stand by itself. It has to be holy something, right? Holy ones. And so there you could substitute the word saints. I know it gets a little confusing, but you could have a number of creatures could be holy ones, right? In this case, we're told very clearly that he's talking about his holy angels. So, all of that to say, I think that Revelation 19 is talking about angels, not talking about humans. I think that is a much weaker interpretation, and I think it's much, much harder to defend that interpretation when we have so many scriptures that are talking about Jesus coming with his angels, God coming with his angels. I could give you more passages, okay? I don't know that I need to, but you can also check out Isaiah 66, verse 15, which talks about the Lord's coming. Actually, you know what? I'm going to, just for the fun of it, I'm going to take you there because, well, it's just so fun. So Isaiah 66, verse 15. All right. So, behold, the Lord will come with fire with his chariots, like a whirlwind to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword the Lord will judge all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. What's the parallel passage? 2 Thessalonians 1:8. Glad you asked. And here we have it. Okay. When the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty, oh, there it is, angels, right? I think this one seals the deal, guys. I think this really seals the deal. So he's coming with his angels. He's not coming with his saints. So we are going to be hidden in some undisclosed chamber, wherever that is going to be. I have no idea. The Lord will figure that out. I don't even know if it's an actual 3D earth-based chamber or if it's some kind of a other dimensional chamber. I have no idea. I suspect it could be the latter, but that's just my speculation. So, but he's coming with his angels. And there we go. All right, let's go to our next question. That was a fun one. Thank you. Always love those. Okay, Dean asks, he says, I didn't ask my question from last week very well. My apologies. I also believe that he emptied himself, but I guess my question is, do you believe, as some do, that that means everything he did while on earth, he did as fully man and not any part divine? Then claiming that anything he did, we can do as well. Dean, that's a great question. I get what you're saying, and thank you for re-clarifying that for me. That is certainly a challenging question because um, the scriptures do say that he emptied himself. Um, he laid aside that glory, and yet we also know that um, you know well, I don't know. I mean, that it's that's a great question. I myself probably struggle with that a little bit. We do get these statements from Jesus that seem to suggest that, hey, if we could just see what he can see, then yes, we would be able to do the same thing. I mean, I've been pondering this question for a very long time. He says, anything you believe you can do. He talks about let your, according to your faith, let it be done unto you. You can move mountains. You just got to talk to it. And, on the one hand, I do believe that. I really do believe that is true. Um, on the other hand, I think that we humans are going to have our minds clouded, our souls burdened, and many other things that will keep us from doing those. Not that it's impossible, but it's not practically possible for us to do those things in this age in our current condition. By condition, I mean we have temptations, we give into those temptations, we are not listening as we ought to the voice of the Lord. Um, and I guess a whole host of things, let's just call it sin for lack of a better word, that would keep us from experiencing and walking on that path of righteousness and listening to the Lord in such a way that we would be able to just speak to a mountain and it moves. On the one hand, that might be a good thing because we might not be so wise if we were to do that. On the other hand, I do think that our general sin, our failings, our giving into temptations are the things that keep us from experiencing those things. So, obviously Jesus came, he laid aside his glory and yet he still had the very essence of the Father or the essence of God, right? So he never gave that up and yet in some way he took on flesh and that is a mystery that I can I can grapple with. I can kind of get my mind around it. But then at the end of the day, I'm like, wow, okay, I guess I still don't really I don't know how you do that, okay? And, yeah, so, it's kinda like, I don't know, like, I use computers a lot, and I understand the principles, right? But I still think they're pretty amazing. The way that we can put electricity into diodes and capacitors and chips and little switches, ons and offs, and I'm like, "Okay, I understand you have a if then or that statement and, the switch is open or it's closed, but how does that make YouTube work?" Like, how does that make all this stuff happen, right? I get it, but then again, it's still kinda cool. So, I would think that, yeah, I kinda get it on a theological level, but on a practical level, I'm still not quite there. So, it's a good question, and I cannot I can't give you a great answer because I myself am still struggling with that. Um, I'm inclined to say that anything that he did, we can do as well. Why would I think that? Because Jesus gave us such statements as to suggest that nothing will be impossible for us if we believe. He talks about this in the book of John. So in John 14, he says, "Most surely I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also, and Greater works than these he will do, because I go to my Father. And whatever you ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified. And the Son, if you ask anything in my name, I will do it. All right. But then he says, if you love me, keep my commandments, and I think that's probably where we falter is, you know, we do love the Lord on a certain level. We love him, and then we don't obey him. I mean, we don't trust him. We don't believe him at some point. And so, yeah. Well, I wish I could say more on that. I really can, because that's all I got. But I'm gonna move on. All right, another question. It says, I've been researching ancient belief on the triune nature of God, and am looking for ancient rabbis that have written about or believed in that. Do you know any resources or names off the top of your head? They may help my research. And what do you say about it? All right, so Dean, you may not be familiar, but I've done a teaching on this, the triune nature of God, and I talk about this. You can look it up right here on my YouTube channel. But I've spent a lot of time on this very topic, and I think it's rather unfortunate that there are a lot of people in the messianic circles, mind you, that are suggesting that the Trinity, yeah, the idea of the Trinity, the nature or origin of the Trinity, are rooted in pagan ideas and not biblical or Jewish thought. And I think that is really very sad. So let me just pull up really quickly here my presentation. So I've got it here on my computer, and I can share that with you so you know what to look for. So the triunity of God, the Trinity's origins are rooted in biblical and Jewish thought, not pagan or Christian or Catholic. Let me just throw that word in there as well. So, um, so this is according to an author, Brian H. Jesus is Israel's Messiah, but not Israel's God. He says, the Trinity and deity of Jesus were a doctrine imposed upon us by a pagan emperor masquerading as a true believer over 200 years after the New Testament was written. Really? Okay, what do the sources really say? It's the things I talk about in the study, that paganism did not create the biblical Trinity or triunity. Paganism, the ancient Near East, such as Egypt, had multiple gods procreating other gods. They had triads. They did not have a triunity. Judaism, in fact, did hold the idea of God's trinity long before the Roman Catholic Church came along, and hence the Roman Catholic Church did not create the idea of the Trinity. I show that the angel of the Lord is God, who is Yeshua pre-flesh or pre-incarnate, and the New Testament writers taught that Yeshua was God in the flesh. All right, so here's just a few of the ideas that you can find in Judaism. So when the time of creation, from the time of creation, constant reference is made in Holy Writ to Messiah and the Messianic hope of Israel. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The Spirit of God means Messiah. All right, so there you go. I mean, there's many, many, many. I won't go through all of these, but it says the honor and majesty with which David tells us that God is clothed, he will bestow on Messiah. The Lord our righteousness, Yehovah Tzidkenu, Rabbi Huna counted amongst the 7 names of Messiah, Yehovah Tzidkenu. God nameth also the King Messiah with his own name. What is the name of King Messiah? Well, Yehovah Tzidkenu. All right. So again, many, many passages that talk about this. We have in the Targumim, it's talking about this, and it says, what is his name? His name is called from eternity, wonderful, the mighty God who liveth to eternity, the Messiah. All right. So again, they had these various ideas, and these are not Christian. All right. So check that out. I go into a lot of detail. I give all the sources, so you can check that out right there, right here on my YouTube channel. And I hope that that will help you to discover some pretty cool stuff. All right. Chris asks, you've mentioned in previous weeks about the dangers of Calvinism and that it's equally as dangerous as JW's teachings. What is it exactly about Jehovah's Witness teachings, beliefs that is so harmful? I haven't done a lot of research on their theology. Not that I'm bashing my brothers and sisters within JW's realms, just want to arm myself with knowledge to expose poor doctrines and maybe help someone if it's Yah's will. Well, so the reason I was kind of picking on Jehovah's Witnesses is that is universally accepted within Christianity as being a cult, whereas Calvinism is considered to be, um, okay doctrine. Okay, even by people that would disagree with Calvinism, they would say, well, they're Christians, but they're just mistaken. So my point wasn't to so much throw the Jehovah's Witnesses under the buses, but it's to say that the Calvinists, in my opinion, are on equally bad footing as the JWs. Now, I think the JWs get a couple things right. Um, um, One that, well, Jesus probably wasn't born on what we call Christmas Day. Okay, so that's one thing that's kind of interesting. But I wouldn't go too far. But they think that Jesus, and this is where I certainly disagree. They think that Jesus was a created being. He was the first of God's created beings, but still a created being. I do take issue with that. Um, Probably the more dangerous stuff. Well, let me back up for a second. They also think that Jesus was crucified on a torture stake, so basically just one tall stick, one tall tree or something without a crossbeam. I don't think it's a huge issue. I think they're mistaken, but I don't think it's a big issue. And if they've got some other things, one of the things that probably that's the most damaging and dangerous is they are against blood transfusions, which certainly could and has resulted in some deaths because they do not allow blood transfusions. But yeah, the thing that probably becomes dangerous is they start telling you uh, how you're supposed to think, and so they will often read from the Watchtower publication, and they're giving it to you as you're supposed to get. Now, a lot of churches do that, quite frankly. But within the ranks of Jehovah's Witnesses, you're not really allowed to question. You're not allowed to think outside the box. I'm obviously overgeneralizing here, but um, they also believe that there are only 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses who are going to go to heaven to actually be with God, whereas everyone else gets to spend eternity down on earth on a veritable paradise. And I half agree with them that I do think that we're going to spend eternity on the earth in a wonderful paradise. But I would radically disagree to suggest that only 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses get to go to heaven. This is where I think they have their theology or eschatology really wrong, because, and I think a lot of Christians do, as a fact as well, that the new Jerusalem is coming down to planet Earth. So there is not going to be any heaven up there, right? There's no heaven up there. The heaven that we speak of is paradise restored here on Earth, and the new Jerusalem, which we would call heaven, that is going to return to planet Earth, and the two, or heaven and earth, are going to be reunited as one. So, but those are really details that you have to sort of get into this to kind of get into and understand and appreciate. So, um, so just to recap, my main point was to suggest that Calvinism is as off as the JWs are in some of their theology, but it's not to necessarily say that the JWs are all godless pagans. I wouldn't say that. I think they have a lot of things wrong, but hey, so do some Christians, right? So, all right, good question. And another question from Chris. Follow-up question, a real easy one. What is your personal favorite book from the scriptures and why? Oh, Chris, that's hard. That's a really hard question. What's my favorite book? There are a lot of good books, all right? I mean, they're all really good. But, sometimes it's the book that I'm currently teaching, but, if you really chained me down and said, "You gotta pick one," I'd probably say Revelation, because it is such an exciting book. It really is. But I'm currently teaching through the book of John, and I'm loving it. I mean, it's just so rich. It's just one of those things I can't really get enough of. So, all right, this is from CZ. Does the correct Hebrew translation of Genesis 6 say there were giants in the earth in those days, or does it say there were giants on the earth in those days. All right, CZ, well, let's take a look at what the text actually says. And I think it says be, which could be, you're not going to like the answer, but it could be in or on, just kind of depending there. So, all right. So there were giants on the earth. That's certainly what the English says, obviously. But let's take a look at the Hebrew. All right, Nephilim ayu ba'aretz. Okay, so this word right here, we're talking about this preposition, this bet right here. Okay, that's the question mark that you're having, and that I suppose somebody is making an issue of. Um, but you know, the word more technically would be in. Sometimes some languages do not make as much of an issue with the words in or on. I mean, in Spanish, you have the word en, which doesn't mean in or on. Well, it typically means in, but you could make a case that it could be on. It sort of depends. Um, Now, in Hebrew, you could also say al, that means upon. Uh, but I think if you were to try to extrapolate from the preposition bet and to suggest that somehow the Nephilim were in the earth as opposed to being on the surface of the earth, I think you'd have to have some supporting arguments to suggest that, because the letter bet, it talks about a lot of things being quote unquote in the earth, but it doesn't mean in the core or the center of the earth. It just means that these are things that are in the land, in the land. Maybe that's another way to look at it. So if you look at it in the land versus on the earth, they kind of mean the same thing. Obviously, with our language, we think on the earth and we're thinking the planet, but in any event. All right. Virginia says, "Are we hidden away during the tribulation if we are on the earth?" Virginia, I don't think so. She says, "You just answered my question." Okay, cool. So I wish, but I don't. I don't suggest. I don't think so. All right. Noah says, "I've heard people say the word Yahweh is a modern New Age rendering of Yehovah. Can you review the etymology of that word?" Okay. Well, that's a big that's a big deal. So the etymology, we're not entirely sure what the etymology is. Okay, but the 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 best theory that I know of, and I'm in agreement with it, is that it's made up of three Hebrew words, which are Haya, Hove, and Yihye. All right, and this would agree with the descriptions that we see of God, who was, who is, and who is to come. So Haya, he was. Hove, he is, and then Yihye, he will be. Uh, God himself says as much, that he says, I am, which is the Hebrew word eheye, which is I will be, or I am being, another way to understand that. So Yud He Vav He seems to be a compilation of Haya, Hove, and then Yihye. Right, so you smash those three together and you get Yud He Vav He. Now, I think it's absolutely bogus. I think it's a stupid claim to suggest that Yahweh is some modern New Age rendering. I just don't believe that. I think a lot of people that make those kind of claims do not know Hebrew. I think they just come up with stuff because they're just grabbing for straws. Now, there are a lot of good scholars who suggest that Yahweh or Yahweh is a good rendering. Um, I happen to disagree. I mean, I think I don't. Let me say this. I think it's a good scholarly attempt. I am more convinced that Yehovah is the actual pronunciation. Um, but I think scholars were trying to deal with it, and this is essentially what they came up with. So again, it has the yud, the hey, the vav, the hey, right? So they were attempting to deal with it. I would not say that that's new age. I think that they simply, I want to be careful I don't oversimplify because it's a complex issue. Okay, it is a complex issue. Um, but so Nehemiah Gordon sort of opened my eyes to the rendering of Yehovah, and I, went and did my own research to kind of double check his, and I think he's correct. I think Yehovah is the proper way to render that. So, I people that have a different rendering, I don't think that they're new age or they're trying to do something terrible. There's another one that probably was just somebody came up with just a mistake, which is Yahuwah. Um, and I spoke with the man who says, I think I'm responsible for that because he was likening the name Yehovah to Yehuda, and he said, well, so there maybe it's Yahoo something. And yeah, I think, and then people just kind of ran with it, and now it's kind of a popular rendering. I think it's completely wrong from a linguistic standpoint, but is it new age? Is it somebody trying to undermine God? I don't think so. I think it's just some people that don't know Hebrew that came up with this Yahuwah thing. As far as Yahweh, again, I think it was very well intended, well educated scholars who thought maybe Yahweh was a pretty good rendering. And again, to be fair, we do find in ancient Egyptian there is the epithet Yahweh, Yahweh. So maybe there's something to that. But from what the Bible, the biblical evidence, and the linguistic evidence, Hebraic evidence, as I understand it, I think Yehovah is probably the best rendering. But we're not 1,000% sure. So I'm going to stick with that. Well, here's another question. If the name is Yahweh, it's David or Dawid? So, the letter W, a lot of the early um, scholars, or a lot of the, let's call them the, scholars in the early 1900s were German. Okay. So, um, think about when you drive a Volkswagen is actually a Volkswagen. Okay. So the W is actually a V sound. And so they were the ones who were doing a lot of the lexicons. Gesenius was one of the all-time great linguists, and he was German, right? So when you render a Vav as a W, what is the intended sound? A V sound, right? So I don't think, and I think then it came into English and we're like, oh, that's a W. So it's a W. But in German, it's a V, it's a V. So I don't think there's any issue at all. I think we've sort of lost track of, who did some of these things. And then it went into German and then it came back to English. And now we're stuck with a W. But if the German, the white people, some of the scholars who suggested Yahweh in German, that would be Yahweh. So we're not that far off. Okay. So David is still David and not Dawid. Now in Arabic, it is Dawid, but not in Hebrew. Wow. All right. That was great. Wow. I mean, that's really great stuff. Some of these linguistic things, sometimes they're easy and sometimes they're complex. And when it comes to the name of Yud-He, Vav-He, that is a more complex discussion. I hope I did it some justice here. But you can check that out on douglashamp.com. I have a bunch of places where you have Yehovah in the text. And of course, check out Nehemiah Gordon's work as well, because he's done a lot of great stuff. All right. Thank you, guys. Love your questions. Keep them coming. And if you haven't gone to Israel, I encourage you to go with us next year. It's going to be fantastic. So check that out at the Way Congregation. You can also go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp and give whatever you want to give. Thank you. Thank you. And we are going to be having a time of Sukkot. So that will be happening here at Cherry Creek in Denver. So do come and join us. Till next time, God bless you.